Hello, and welcome back to Sci-Fi Stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has recently disabled our channel's monetization, leaving us without an operating budget. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking team to sustain their livelihoods and keep creating these stories for you. You can do this by scanning the QR code on your screen or clicking the donation link in the description or comments below. The Pangea Interstellar Grand Council convened within a colossal, suspended amphitheater, anchored precariously amidst the shimmering dust of a luminous asteroid belt. Inside this architectural marvel, the air was suffocatingly thick with the scent of 1,000 different biospheres and the heavy, stagnant weight of bureaucratic self-importance. The hall was a testament to infinite wealth and unchecked vanity, a place where entire star systems were traded over whispered conversations. Representatives from countless worlds occupied towering, gravity-defying pods, their collective presence forming a dizzying mosaic of scales, feathers, chitin, and synthetic flesh. Today, they had gathered for a historic tribunal, though the atmosphere felt less like a hall of justice and more like a theatrical execution. Taking center stage was the representative of the Xylok faction. The Xylok were an arrogant, crystalline race, their bodies composed of shifting, jagged prisms that refracted the ambient light into blinding, multicolored arrays. The Xylok speaker's voice resonated through the chamber's acoustic dampeners, sounding like the grinding of heavy glass. For 50 years, the Xylok representative echoed, the translation matrix delivering the words with a cold, piercing clarity to every earpiece in the hall. For 50 cycles of the grand rotation, the species known as humanity has occupied a seat at this esteemed assembly, and for 50 years, they have been nothing but a parasitic void. A murmur of agreement rippled through the upper tiers. The Xylok flared with a self-satisfied azure luminescence, continuing the ruthless indictment. Earth and her pathetic scattering of colonies are energy black holes. They continuously siphon the Council's shared quantum reserves, draining our collective resources. And what have they offered in return? Have they provided revolutionary weapons? Have they contributed exotic materials? Have they offered anything of value to the defensive fleets of this galaxy? The answer is absolute zero. Far from the magnificent central podiums, banished to a small, unremarkable metallic table at the absolute furthest edge of the amphitheater, sat the representative of humanity. His name was Floyd Burnside. He was an old man, his face weathered by the harsh realities of space and time, starkly contrasting with the ageless, genetically perfected diplomats surrounding him. He wore a faded, charcoal gray vest over a simple white shirt, while the alien delegates preened and postured. Burnside sat in absolute stillness. The only movement was the slow, rhythmic, and deliberate tapping of his index finger against the cool metal of his table. Tap, tap, tap. His sharp, pale eyes tracked the Xylok speaker, betraying neither fear nor the righteous anger one might expect from a man whose entire species was being publicly humiliated. The Xylok speaker raised a crystalline appendage, signaling the end of the prosecution. We move for immediate expulsion. We move to sever the backup energy conduits to Earth space. Let them survive on the dying embers of their own sun. The voting process was ruthlessly efficient, driven by long-standing prejudice. Across the vast dome, holographic runes blinked and changed color as the thousands of delegates cast their judgments. It took mere moments to condemn an entire civilization. The central display flared a blinding crimson, calculating the final tally. 89% in favor. The verdict was absolute. Humanity was officially stripped of its membership. Their lifeline to the galactic energy grid was abruptly severed. High upon the presiding dais, the Grand Chairman, a towering, multi-limbed entity draped in ceremonial golden silks, leaned forward, his wide, amphibian mouth twisted into a grotesque smirk of utter contempt. He silenced the murmuring crowd with a wave of his hand. He was waiting. This was the moment of entertainment they all craved. The chairman expected a dramatic display, the typical psychological reaction of a lesser species cornered by superior forces. He expected Burnside to activate his microphone and beg for mercy. He anticipated frantic negotiations, promises of servitude, or perhaps a pathetic, furious tirade. The immense hall fell dead silent. Thousands of eyes locking onto the tiny, isolated table at the fringe of the room. Floyd Burnside stopped tapping his finger. The silence stretched, heavy and profound. Slowly. The old man pushed his chair back. The metallic scrape was jarringly loud in the quiet chamber. He stood up. He did not reach for the microphone. He did not look at the Zylok, nor did he scan the hostile faces of the galactic community. Instead, Burnside looked down and methodically buttoned his faded vest, ensuring the worn fabric sat straight across his chest. He then looked up, directly at the Grand Chairman. Burnside offered a single, shallow nod, a gesture of painfully polite, formal farewell. Then, he turned his back on the Pangea Interstellar Grand Council, without uttering a single syllable. Without looking back, Floyd Burnside walked out of the massive double doors, the rhythmic click of his shoes echoing like the ticking of a doomsday clock against the polished floor. The solitary click of Floyd Burnside's shoes against the polished metal floor was the only sound permitted to exist in that immense space. As he took his first step toward the colossal exit doors, a synchronized rustle cascaded through the far edge of the amphitheater. All 40 members of the human diplomatic delegation stood as one. There was no hesitation, no whispered consultations, no exchanged glances of despair. They moved with a chilling, mechanized grace, falling into a flawless geometric formation behind their leader. The Grand Council watched, momentarily stunned by the sheer, unwavering discipline of the display. Then, the spell broke. A low, rolling wave of laughter began to echo from the upper tiers, quickly building into a deafening cacophony of mocking amusement. The alien delegates leaned across their ornate balconies, pointing their varied appendages at the retreating figures. To their arrogant minds, this rigid, silent departure was nothing more than the pathetic, theatrical pride of a defeated species desperately clinging to the very last shreds of their dignity. They reveled in what they believed was a humiliating retreat, high above the jeering crowds. However, secured within the sensory isolation of the central analytics node, sat Vale. She was the chief data analyst of the Terran species, a race renowned for their hyper-cognitive processing and intrinsic, almost spiritual connection to the digital currents of the galaxy. While the Council celebrated their hollow, ignorant victory, Vale's 4 luminous eyes were darting rapidly across cascading streams of holographic data. Something was deeply, unsettlingly wrong with the telemetry. She tapped a rapid sequence on her crystalline console. Isolating the human departure metrics, based on the Council's projected models, she expected to see the chaotic, desperate scramble of a species suddenly cut off from the galactic grid. She anticipated emergency distress signals, rushed atmospheric breaches, and panicked supply requisitions flooding the local networks. Instead, she found absolute zero. The network was silent. Run a temporal trace on all human logistical movements and resource allocations. Vale commanded the Central Artificial Intelligence, her voice a calm, melodic hum that completely belied the growing, icy knot of dread tightening in her chest. The data materialized in the air before her, painting a picture that entirely defied the Council's self-serving narrative. The humans had not initiated their withdrawal sequence in sudden response to the expulsion vote. According to the irrefutable, hard-coded logs of the hyperspace transit network. The massive human exodus had begun precisely 4 months ago. Vile dug deeper into the archives, her slender, translucent fingers dancing frantically over the interface. She accessed the live security feeds from human diplomatic facilities, previously bustling transit stations, and sprawling colonial sectors scattered across numerous allied planets. What the optical sensors relayed sent a profound shiver down her spine. The outposts were completely empty. They were not merely abandoned in a rush. They were surgically scrubbed. Every single human settlement had been dismantled down to the bare foundation. There was not a single stray synthetic fiber, not a forgotten maintenance tool, not even a microscopic speck of organic dust left behind to prove they had ever existed in those spaces. She cross-referenced the interstellar financial ledgers. Every single credit of human debt across thousands of trading hubs had been paid in full. There were no outstanding balances, no broken contracts, no loose ends whatsoever. Frantically, she probed their central data archives, hoping to find a fragment of a communication log, a leftover schematic blueprint, absolutely anything. She found nothing but pristine void space. The humans had overwritten their entire digital footprint using cryptographic algorithms so incredibly complex and aggressively destructive that they instantly shattered the Council's most advanced recovery protocols. It was an erasure of terrifying, impossible perfection. They had systematically unmade their presence in the known galaxy. Trembling slightly, Vial shifted her focus to the deep space tracking arrays, desperately searching for the human evacuation fleet. When her sensors finally located them, her underlying dread solidified into pure, cold terror. A refugee fleet of that scale should be a disorganized, vulnerable swarm of civilian transports and desperate freighters pushing their structural limits. The human armada was nothing of the sort. Millions of vessels, ranging from colossal, heavily armored dreadnoughts to tiny, agile scout ships, were moving in total, synchronized silence. They were not fleeing. They were executing a massive, coordinated migration. The fleet navigated along trajectories calculated with absolute, unforgiving mathematical precision. They formed a staggering river of silent steel, flowing steadily away from the brightly illuminated core of the Council's territory and heading straight toward the dark, uncharted galactic fringe. They were vectoring directly into a sector of the cosmos completely devoid of habitable planets, stellar resources, or navigational beacons. It was a desolate region, clearly marked in ominous crimson on every galactic star chart. The dead zone. Vial frantically tried to open a secure emergency channel to the Grand Chairman, but the communication system was hopelessly overloaded with the celebratory broadcasts and political posturing of 1,000 different worlds. The Council was entirely too busy dividing the non-existent spoils of the human territories to notice the chilling reality unfolding right at the edge of their vision. Helplessly, she watched the massive holographic tracking map as the absolute rear guard of the human fleet approached the outermost territorial border. The silent countdown in her mind perfectly synchronized with the movement of that final, solitary ship. It crossed the threshold. In that exact fraction of a second, the impossible happened. Across the entire outer rim of the galaxy, the colossal quantum transceiver relays, the very backbone of the Council's communication and early warning network, simultaneously powered down. The lights blinked out all at once, plunging the borderlands into total, suffocating darkness. 3 weeks passed since the Great Exodus. The grand mathematical models orchestrated by the Zylok economic ministers had guaranteed a massive, immediate surge in the galactic energy grid. Severing the human territories was supposed to flood the core worlds with an unprecedented surplus of power, ushering in a new era of opulent prosperity. The reality, however, brutally defied every known law of interstellar thermodynamics. There was no surplus. Instead, emergency klaxons began to scream deep within the heavily fortified engineering decks of the border sector stations. The colossal dark matter reactors, terrifying engines that harnessed the very fabric of the cosmos to generate power, were experiencing catastrophic, completely inexplicable pressure drops. The energy was not being conserved. It was rapidly bleeding out into a localized, ravenous vacuum that simply should not exist according to standard physics. The containment fields were fluctuating wildly, struggling to maintain the delicate balance of anti-gravity pressures. Deep inside her heavily shielded analytical node, Vial completely ignored the panicked maintenance chatter flooding the internal communications. She was desperately hunting ghosts, bypassing every standard security protocol. She delved into heavily fragmented cache drives, salvaged from the absolute bleeding edge of former human space. The humans had ruthlessly wiped their primary data. But Vial was Tehran. Her mind was uniquely adapted to read the phantom digital imprints left scarred on the physical hardware. Through hours of grueling, unauthorized decryption, diving through layers of aggressive counter-intrusion software, she managed to salvage a single, heavily encrypted operational ledger. When her algorithms finally shattered the cipher, the revealed truth hit her with the devastating force of a kinetic orbital strike. The colossal sums of raw galactic energy the humans had supposedly drained over 50 long years were never, at any point, allocated to their civilian infrastructure. The raw data showed their sprawling cities operated on crude, heavily localized fusion reactors. Their domestic economy was entirely self-sufficient, austere even. The unfathomable, staggering amount of power they had relentlessly siphoned from the Grand Council was being covertly funneled into a highly classified, massively distributed network of orbital megastructures. These constructs were positioned precisely along the razor edge of the perimeter bordering the dead zone. The humans designated it the Stellar Anchor Project. Her hypercognitive mind raced, violently connecting the terrifying dots. When that final human vessel crossed the border, the sudden, sweeping blackout of the quantum transceivers had been a fatal misinterpretation by the Council's security grid. The humans had not initiated a petty act of sabotage against the communication relays. They had simply unplugged the main power cord. They had systematically deactivated the stellar anchors. Trembling with a profound, existential dread, Vial drafted a Level 1 catastrophic anomaly report, frantically appending the decrypted ledger as absolute proof. She bypassed the bureaucratic filters and routed it directly to the Grand Chairman's primary executive terminal. Her desperate warning was summarily dismissed within exactly 2 seconds. The council chambers were entirely consumed by a ravenous, greedy frenzy. Politicians viciously squabbling over the lucrative mining rights to barren human asteroids. They were willfully deaf to the cosmic storm, gathering silently on their immediate threshold. Then, the universe itself violently tore the veil of their arrogant ignorance. It started in the extreme northern fringe. Deep Space Monitoring Station. Delta reported a microscopic, barely perceptible gravitational flutter. A single microsecond later, 3 entire solar systems simply ceased to exist on the central stellar cartography grid. Gone. Billions of innocent lives, massive gas giants, sprawling asteroid belts, and 3 ancient main-sequence stars were totally erased from the fabric of reality in the space between 2 heartbeats. Vial stared at her primary monitors in abject, paralyzing horror. She ran diagnostic scan after diagnostic scan, praying for a sensor malfunction. There was no blinding spike in gamma radiation indicative of a sudden, unnatural supernova. There were no tachyon emissions suggesting the deployment of prohibited, planet-cracking superweapons. There was no frantic subspace chatter, no desperate distress signals, no floating debris field. There was only absolute, pristine, terrifyingly cold silence. It was as if a divine, cosmic scalpel had surgically and flawlessly excised a massive chunk of reality itself, leaving absolutely nothing behind. Blind panic finally breached the gilded, impenetrable walls of the Grand Council. The petty squabbling instantly ceased, replaced by a frantic, disorganized, and terrified rush to ascertain the nature of the invisible threat. Forced to act, the Grand Chairman authorized the immediate, emergency deployment of the First Fleet. It was the absolute pinnacle of their collective military might. A terrifying, invincible armada of 10,000 heavy cruisers, armed with antimatter artillery, explicitly designed to subjugate rebellious empires and glass entire worlds. Vial watched the tactical telemetry feed with bated breath as the massive fleet initiated a beautifully synchronized hyperspace jump toward the silent northern fringe. The thousands of tracking icons glowed bright green on her display. Advanced navigation computers calculating the precise, tactical moment of their re-entry into normal space. The digital countdown reached 0. The icons flashed brightly, indicating a successful, flawless exit from the hyperspace conduit directly into the target zone. And then they vanished. 10,000 elite warships, millions of highly trained, heavily armed personnel, simply blinked out of the secure telemetry stream the exact millisecond they crossed the invisible perimeter of the vanished systems. Not a single particle of weapon fire was recorded. Not a single byte of structural damage telemetry was received by Central Command. The abyssal void had simply swallowed their greatest armada whole, plunging the Central Command hub into a suffocating, terrified silence. Raw, unfiltered panic finally shattered the gilded facade of the Grand Council. The impenetrable confidence that had defined the interstellar elite for thousands of years evaporated into thin air. Inside the Grand Amphitheater, the meticulously structured hierarchy devolved into a chaotic frenzy of screaming delegates and frantic admirals. The disappearance of their invincible armada was a mathematical impossibility, an event that simply could not be processed by their advanced tactical algorithms. They were entirely blind, thrashing wildly in the dark against an enemy they could not target, could not negotiate with, and could not understand. Amidst the deafening clamor of a collapsing empire, Vial sat in her isolated sanctuary, her mind detached from the screaming frequencies of her superiors. She was systematically tearing through her own personal security logs, hours before his silent departure. Floyd Burnside had transmitted a microscopic, seemingly corrupted data packet to her private terminal. It was disguised as a standard diplomatic farewell receipt, entirely ignored by the automated security scrubbers. Now, with the universe unraveling around them, Vial applied every decryption cipher in the Terran arsenal to crack its shell. When the encryption finally yielded, it did not reveal a manifesto, nor a declaration of war. It was a singular, heavily compressed directory, bearing a chillingly simple title, The Void Ledger. As her augmented consciousness interfaced with the data, Vial was violently plunged into a terrifying, paradigm-shifting reality. The ledger contained centuries of esoteric astrophysical observations, theoretical mathematics that defied standard quantum mechanics, and terrifying visual telemetry from the edge of the galaxy. It detailed the existence of an apocalyptic anomaly the humans simply called the Fracture. This was no hostile alien armada. It was not a biological plague or a rogue artificial intelligence. The Fracture was a fundamental breakdown in the topological fabric of space-time itself. It was a non-linear, invisible phenomenon, a cosmic apex predator without a mind, without a shape, and without a purpose other than total consumption. The ledger described it as a slow-moving, self-propagating phase, transition of the vacuum. It fed by devouring gravitational constants, actively unweaving the binding forces of the universe and bending reality into an infinitely dense, lightless singularity. It was the primordial dark, an expanding ocean of nothingness that had been slowly, bleeding into the galaxy for millennia. The most devastating revelation, however, lay in the heavily redacted operational files detailing humanity's true role in the cosmos. For centuries, the species known as humanity had never been the parasitic, stagnant scavengers the Council had branded them. They were the gatekeepers. They were the silent, voluntary sentinels standing watch at the edge of the abyss. The astronomical volumes of energy they had continuously requisitioned from the galactic grid were never wasted. Every single joule was meticulously channeled into the Stellar Anchor Project. The anchors were not weapons. They were colossal, interlinked electromagnetic projection engines, designed to weave a staggering, galaxy-spanning containment shield. The humans had used the raw power of the Grand Council to generate an artificial, hyper-dense gravity wall, a cosmic dam holding back the crushing tide of the fracture. The realization hit Vale with paralyzing, suffocating force. Humanity had never petitioned to join the Grand Council out of a desire for economic prosperity, technological trade, or political prestige. They joined solely to gain covert access to the vast, interconnected energy infrastructure of the alien empires. They endured 50 years of relentless humiliation, systemic political abuse, and arrogant condescension from species who considered them lower than insects. They swallowed their pride, playing the role of the pathetic beggar, all to siphon enough power to keep the shield operational, secretly protecting the very same arrogant creatures who continuously spat upon them. And then, the Council held their historic tribunal. By voting for expulsion, by viciously severing the power conduits to the human sectors out of petty greed and misplaced superiority. The Grand Council had achieved what the fracture could not. They had manually pulled the plug on the only barrier keeping them alive. They had shattered the dam. Tears of absolute existential terror streamed down Vile's translucent face. She bypassed all remaining administrative protocols and forcibly overrode the central visual displays inside the chaotic Grand Council amphitheater. The screaming arguments of the alien delegates were instantly silenced as the massive holographic projectors dominated the room, broadcasting an unfiltered, live optical feed from a deep space observation satellite positioned near the Xyloc home sectors. The delegates stared upward, their arrogant posturing melting into abject, primal horror. Through the optical feed, they watched the impossible become real. The majestic, spiral arm of the northern quadrant was actively twisting, sickeningly distorted, as if viewed through a cracked, melting lens. The majestic, crystalline homeworlds of the Xyloc faction, the very planets that had spearheaded the expulsion of humanity, were caught in the invisible tide. The Council watched in absolute silence as the immense gravitational shear of the fracture took hold. The Xyloc planets began to elongate, their perfectly engineered continents cracking and fracturing. Oceans boiled into the vacuum as the planetary crusts violently shattered into billions of jagged shards. There was no grand explosion. There was no fiery climax. The shattered remnants of the Xyloc civilization were simply pulled outward, spiraling into a dense, terrifyingly absolute blackness that consumed the starlight itself. The void swallowed them whole, leaving not even a ripple in the fabric of space. Inside the amphitheater, the Grand Chairman collapsed onto his golden throne, his breathing shallow and rapid. The crushing weight of their collective ignorance settled over the room like a physical shroud. The alien empires, in all their infinite wealth and terrifying military might, were nothing but microscopic dust motes floating blindly in a hostile cosmos. In their blinding hubris, they had proudly signed their own death warrant, executing the only wardens willing to hold back the dark. In the span of just 2 months, 40% of the Grand Council's once boundless territory was utterly consumed. The Great Galactic Map, a majestic tapestry woven over millennia of endless conquest and intricate diplomacy, dissolved into a terrifying void. Trillions of sentient beings were forced into a chaotic, blind exodus. The interstellar economy, a hyper-complex machine that had run flawlessly for countless generations, collapsed entirely within the first 3 weeks. Core worlds that had never known scarcity or fear were suddenly flooded with desperate refugee armadas, their orbital docks buckling and shattering under the weight of 1,000 displaced civilizations. The Grand Council did not surrender quietly. In their final, desperate throes of stubborn arrogance, they unleashed the full, terrifying might of their apocalyptic arsenals. The combined military forces of the surviving alien empires formed defensive lines spanning several light years, firing antimatter cannons and deploying experimental black hole bombs directly into the creeping dark. They threw the very fires of creation at the abyss, hoping to burn the shadow away. It was completely, catastrophically useless. The fracture did not burn, nor did it shatter. It fed. The unimaginable kinetic and thermal energy released by the Council's superweapons only served to fuel the anomaly, drastically accelerating its violent expansion. They were attempting to extinguish a raging cosmic inferno by drowning it in raw, volatile fuel. Stripped of their invincible fleets, their infinite wealth, and their suffocating pride, the galactic elite were finally broken. The grand hierarchy crumbled into dust in an act of ultimate, unimaginable despair. The Grand Chairman, the very same towering, multi-limbed entity who had openly mocked Floyd Burnside's silent departure, bypassed all ceremonial protocols. He ordered a galaxy-wide, unencrypted emergency broadcast, forcing every single remaining communication relay to lock onto a universal frequency aimed directly at the heart of the humans' designated dead zone. The broadcast overrode every surviving monitor, every desperate refugee ship navigation screen, and every doomed planetary capital plaza. The Grand Chairman was not sitting upon his elevated golden throne. He was on his knees against the cold floor. His ceremonial silks were torn and deeply stained, his amphibian features sagging with the absolute, crushing terror of impending extinction. "To the human race," the chairman pleaded, his voice trembling, completely stripped of all its former bureaucratic resonance and arrogant thunder. "To Floyd Burnside, or whoever still listens in the dark, we were blind. We were arrogant fools. We broke the seal, on behalf of the trillions of innocent lives now facing the end of all things. I beg you, please, we surrender our pride. We surrender our territories. We surrender our titles. Just save us." For 7 agonizing days, the universe offered absolutely no reply. The transmission echoed into the desolate abyss of the dead zone and was simply swallowed by the suffocating silence. On the capital world of the Grand Council, the atmosphere began to visibly warp. The perpetually perfect, simulated azure sky slowly bruised, twisting into a sickly, deep purple. It was the visual signature of catastrophic gravitational shear, the undeniable sign that the invisible, ravenous tide of the fracture had finally breached the inner core. The end was no longer a distant theoretical concept discussed in panicked committee meetings. It was actively scraping against their planetary atmospheric shields. Blind panic gave way to a catatonic, collective resignation. Trillions of beings simply stopped running, dropping to the streets, looking up at the bruised heavens, waiting for the inevitable moment when gravity would reverse and tear their flesh from their bones. The final spark of hope was completely, totally extinguished. Then, the very fabric of reality violently shuddered. It was not a sound, but a profound kinetic shockwave that bypassed physical barriers and rattled the structural foundations of every planet in the core sector. In the central command center, every single telemetry sensor, deep space array, and gravitational monitor simultaneously screamed in a deafening chorus of catastrophic overload. The warning lights wailed, blinking blindingly bright as they registered a mass reading that completely shattered their maximum calibrated scales. All eyes turned back to the primary optical feeds, expecting to see the final, crushing wave of the fracture consuming the capital system. Instead, they looked toward the perimeter of the dead zone. The absolute darkness of that forbidden sector began to violently boil. The void did not rip open to reveal a rescuing armada of war dreadnoughts or a desperate human counterattack force. What emerged from the blackness defied all conventional understanding of engineering, physics, and sanity. It was an artificial superstructure of such staggering, incomprehensible scale that it dwarfed entire solar systems. It rose from the depths of the dead zone like a mechanical god waking from a long, silent slumber. Its colossal, metallic surface etched with glowing continents of intricate circuitry. Enormous, blindingly radiant rings of pure energy encapsulated the colossal sphere, rotating in slow, majestic synchrony to stabilize a gravitational well, so impossibly massive, it began to push the crushing tide of the fracture backward. It tore through the bruised purple fabric of space with slow, agonizing majesty, illuminating the dying galactic core with the blinding, brilliant light of a forged, artificial dawn. The colossal superstructure, rising from the depths of the shadows, was the Ark Citadel. It was not merely a vessel, nor was it a simple station. It was a staggering masterpiece of cosmic engineering, a testament to an impossible willpower to forge its invincible outer shell. Humanity had spent thousands of years in absolute secrecy, systematically dismantling and harvesting every single dead star, frozen gas giant, and rogue planet hidden within the boundaries of the dead zone. It was an artificial sanctuary forged in the quiet dark, a celestial fortress completely hidden from the arrogant, prying eyes of the galactic elite. Across the dying core worlds, every surviving holographic projector, every flickering bridge monitor, and every public plaza screen forcibly synchronized. The static cleared, and the brilliant, orderly interior of the Ark Citadel flooded the displays. Standing before a backdrop of towering, humming quantum cores was Floyd Burnside. He wore the exact same faded, charcoal gray vest. His expression remained entirely untouched by the apocalyptic chaos tearing the universe apart outside. His eyes held the same quiet, sharp intensity as they had on the day he walked away from the grand amphitheater. "You called to the dark," Burnside began, his voice echoing with crystal clarity across the terrified remnants of 1,000,000,000,000 lives. "And the dark has finally answered." He paused, allowing the heavy reality to settle over the panicked masses. "When my people walked away, you assumed it was an act of wounded pride. You assumed we were retreating to build a weapon of vengeance. You cannot build a weapon to assassinate a hurricane. You cannot wage a tactical war against the changing of the cosmic seasons. The anomaly you face is a fundamental force of nature, a localized collapse of reality itself. It cannot be destroyed by your armadas. It can only be survived." Burnside stepped closer to the visual receptor, his gaze piercing through the digital feed, looking directly into the souls of the alien kings and chairmen. "For 50 years, we stood at your borders. We siphoned your endless power to weave an electromagnetic dam, not to defeat the anomaly, but to stall its tide. We bled your excess energy to buy ourselves time to finish this." He gestured slightly to the vast, luminous expanse of the citadel behind him. "The Ark Citadel is not a warship. It is a fully independent, self-sustaining pocket universe, encased in a layer of impenetrable, degenerate matter. It is the Ark that will ride out the storm." The final, crushing truth descended upon the galaxy. Burnside's voice dropped, ringing with absolute, unyielding authority. "We are not here to save your planets. Your oceans will boil. Your grand halls will shatter. The space outside this hull is already condemned. We brought a lifeboat to save the living, not to salvage the rotting empires you built upon their backs." The power dynamic of the entire cosmos inverted in a single heartbeat. There are no privileged boarding passes, Burnside stated. To step through the gates of the Ark Citadel, you must leave the old world behind. The Grand Council is dead. Your invincible fleets, your ancestral territories, your royal titles, and your towering arrogance mean absolutely nothing in the void. Every single entity seeking refuge will permanently disarm their vessels. You will completely lower your defensive shields. You will submit, entirely and without condition, to the Integration Act managed by the human race. You will enter our home, not as masters of the galaxy, but as survivors seeking shelter. Silence. A heavy, profound, and monumental stillness settled over the billions of beings watching the broadcast. It was the absolute, undeniable death of interstellar supremacy. This time, no one laughed. The multi-limbed Grand Chairman, still kneeling on his ruined palace floors, simply bowed his head, his shoulders shaking as the realization washed over him. They had to abandon their godhood to simply exist. Slowly, in the space above the dying capital, a massive, jagged Xyloc dreadnought, a vessel that had once commanded the destruction of entire star systems, powered down its antimatter plasma cannons. Its shimmering, multicolored deflector shields dissipated into the cold vacuum. With a slow, mournful grace, the dreadnought aligned its thrusters and moved toward the blindingly bright receiving gates of the Ark Citadel. It was followed by a graceful Terran diplomatic cruiser, then a battered flotilla of merchant ships. One by one, the alien races surrendered. The mighty armadas of the galaxy formed an endless, agonizingly slow procession, shutting down their weapons and bowing their immense metallic heads as they drifted into the radiant, orderly sanctuary crafted by the very species they had once deemed parasites. Floyd Burnside stood alone before the massive, transparent viewport of the primary command deck. Outside the glass, the terrifying, bruised purple horizon of the anomaly crashed against the invincible hull of the Ark Citadel, violently swallowing the last remnants of the old stars into an eternal, lightless shadow. Yet, Burnside did not watch the destruction of the old world. He turned his back to the glass, looking inward, behind him, bathed in the warm, artificial sunlight of the pocket universe. A new galaxy was taking its first, hesitant breaths, learning to exist under a fair, unyielding order forged by human hands. The gilded lamp of the old empires was forever extinguished, but humanity had carried the fire through the dark, igniting a dawn that would last until the end of time. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. Where in the world are you tuning in from right now? We would love to know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this epic journey, please consider supporting our channel. A donation of just $1 goes a long way in helping us pay our hardworking staff, allowing them to support their families and continue bringing you even better stories. You can support us by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the donation link in the description and pinned comment. Thank you for being with us, and we will see you in the next adventure.